From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The Commerce Department says the U.S. economy expanded at its fastest rate in more than 2 years. From April through June, the economy grew at a rate of 4.6%. That is good news. During the first 3 months of the year, the country's economy shrank by more than 2%. Some economists say the second quarter growth is a sign that the U.S. economy is finally improving. Others are not so sure. A severe winter is blamed for hurting businesses and keeping Americans away from shopping centers early in the year. The sharp increase in economic activity from April to June was welcome. But financial expert Greg McBride of Bankrate.com says it is only 3 months of growth. He spoke with VOA on Skype. Investors on Wall Street, however, have had confidence in the economy. The recent growth numbers pushed stock prices higher. The S&P 500 index, an important stock market measure, reached close to 2,000 points in recent weeks. Since then, stock prices have been up and down. David Stockton is an expert with the Peterson Institute for International Economics. He says economic conditions are improving as businesses increase investment spending. The Bureau of Economic Analysis, or BEA, said business spending and exports caused the increase in growth. That also could help the job market. The national unemployment rate is currently 5.9%. Yet wages have remained mostly unchanged, although there has been some job growth in the past year. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carolyn Presutti.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. A United States congressional committee has passed a bill aimed at easing approval of future U.S. trade agreements with other countries. The Senate Finance Committee recently approved Trade Promotion Authority, also known as fast-track legislation. The TPA confirms the power of the president to negotiate trade agreements. The measure sets congressional goals and guidance for trade negotiations. But once an agreement is reached, lawmakers cannot propose amendments. The bill now goes to the full Senate, where heated debate is expected. The United States is currently active in negotiations on 2 major trade agreements. One is the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. Those talks involve the United States and 11 other nations around the Pacific Ocean. President Barack Obama has said the United States has to shape the rules so that American businesses and workers can compete in Asian markets. If the U.S. does not act, he says, China will. The other agreement is with the European Union. It is called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP. Trade Promotion Authority is considered important to passage of both trade deals. The aim of the TTIP agreement is to remove tariffs, simplify trade processes, and remove restrictions on trade in areas that affect 800 million people. Supporters say the agreement could create 13 million jobs on either side of the Atlantic. Opponents disagree. Recently, thousands of people demonstrated in Germany and other countries to protest the trade agreement. For VOA Learning English, I'm Jonathan Evans.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. There is a policy dispute in Washington over a government agency that helps exporters. On one side is the American business community. On the other side are conservative Republican Party lawmakers. Unless Congress takes action, the Export-Import Bank of the United States could be forced to stop accepting new customers at the end of June. The bank provides loans and other help to buyers of U.S. products. W.S. Darley and Company makes fire trucks in the United States and sells them worldwide. Its chief executive officer says customers can spread their payments out over a period of time, making them more affordable. Business leaders and officials say small companies making products from pickles to ice cream have received help from the agency. The bank's supporters say U.S. exports would slow without help from the government agency. The Export-Import Bank also provides help to big companies. The aircraft maker Boeing says it would have to move some of its manufacturing jobs overseas without the help it receives. But Delta Airlines says the bank has helped foreign customers buy airplanes from Boeing at a lower cost than Delta can. The airline company says that hurts its profits and U.S. aviation jobs. Recently, the House of Representatives Financial Services Committee held hearings. Republican Texas Congressman Jeb Hensarling chairs the committee. He says big companies get most of the bank's help. But supporters say the Export-Import Bank provides important help when competing with government-supported foreign companies. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. West Coast ports in the United States are busy again. Recently, negotiators reached a version of a settlement in a 9-month labor dispute and work slowdown. Now that goods again are being unloaded, the dock workers and employers say they can talk about long-term problems. Many ships have been docked or have been waiting offshore at 29 West Coast ports. Thousands of containers on those ships are waiting to be unloaded and transported across the U.S. Port officials say it will take months to process all the cargo, or goods. Most dock workers returned to work while negotiations for the 5-year contract continued. Craig Miralese is with the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. He said some of the hard issues included outsourcing good jobs or moving them elsewhere. Workers say administrative jobs at the ports have been moving to other states and other countries. Workers also say they worry about increasing automation of port operations, which reduces the need for people. Many businesses depend on goods passing through the ports, including beer makers that use imported hops, produce coming to the U.S., and farmers with crops to ship overseas. The labor dispute began in July, when a labor agreement ended. The work stoppage has affected 29 West Coast ports for months and slowed U.S. trade with Asia. Those ports process more than 25% of all U.S. sea trade and more than 70% of the nation's imports from Asia. For VOA Learning English, I'm Jonathan Evans.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. 2 recent economic reports warn that although the world economy is growing, complicating issues like lower oil prices and conflict could hurt progress. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, has reduced its prediction for world economic growth from 3.8 to 3.5%. That is still an improvement over 2014. But the international lender says some major economies are facing economic struggles. The price of oil is about half of what it was last June. The IMF's chief economist, Olivier Blanchard, says lower oil prices have helped many major economies, but investment has dropped in oil exporting countries. The United Nations also released a report called the World Economic Situation and Prospects 2015. UN economists predict growth this year will be 3.1%. They point out that crises like the Ebola outbreak in West Africa and conflict in Ukraine could hurt a world economy showing signs of improvement. Many see cost-cutting as a barrier to growth. High debt levels have limited opportunities for expansion in Europe. Alfredo Calcagno is an economist with the UN Conference on Trade and Development. He says big cost-cutting programs suppress economic recovery. Greece, he said, is one example. The report predicts Africa's growth rate will increase this year and next. But in Africa south of the Sahara Desert, IMF economists say growth expectations have weakened, especially in Nigeria and South Africa. The U.S. also is expected to show good growth of over 3% this year. UN economists expect East Asia to remain the fastest growing area, with economic expansion of almost 5%. China's growth is expected to be under 7% this year. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The International Monetary Fund says sanctions linked to the crisis in Ukraine could end up hurting Russia's economy. The IMF says the sanctions could lead to a 9% drop in Russia's gross domestic product, or GDP, the value of all its goods and services. The Russian economy shrank over the past year because of Western measures aimed at punishing Russia for its actions in Ukraine. Russian measures against the West also hurt its economy. In addition, low prices for oil exports increased pressure on the value of Russian money and the country's finances. Now, the Russian economy is showing signs of stabilizing. The economy no longer appears to be as weak as it once was. Last year, Western countries limited financing for major Russian banks and energy companies. The West also restricted high technology exports to Russia's energy industry. In reaction, the Russian government banned imports of most Western food products. The IMF estimated the immediate effect of sanctions and Russian actions against the West reduced Russia's gross domestic product by up to 1.5%. The IMF said Russia would return to economic growth next year, saying financial conditions in the country would normalize. It predicted weak economic growth of about 1.5% a year in coming years. However, the international lender urged Russia to reduce state involvement in the economy and to protect property rights and increase competition. For VOA Learning English, I'm Jonathan Evans.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. The Brazilian government invested billions of dollars to prepare for the 2014 World Cup. The money has been spent on infrastructure, like roads, and stadiums for World Cup events. It also has paid for security and social projects. The government says these investments will result in long-term gains for Brazil. But independent experts say effects of the spending are mixed. Urban planners say the $11 billion spent on infrastructure has created jobs for poor Brazilians. But they say this development has a price. Some people are questioning the value of police pacification units, called the UPP in Portuguese. Officials have sent these special police forces to poor neighborhoods, or favelas, to drive out drug traffickers and other criminals. Chris Fafney teaches at Fluminense University in Rio de Janeiro. He says, the drug traffickers just move their operations to other favelas. But he adds that the UPP have brought some order to once lawless neighborhoods. He says these forces have opened some areas to tourism or state-supported projects or businesses. The organizing body of the World Cup, FIFA, also invested in social programs. Lisa Delpy Nirati is with Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. She says the investments have led to programs for educating young people about the environment, the disease AIDS, or the importance of staying in school. But critics note that some cities in Europe have rejected proposals to hold huge sports events to push development. They say a new model is needed if nations organizing such activities are to prevent protests like those earlier in Brazil. For VOA Learning English, I'm Carla Babb.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Women entrepreneurs are getting more help and resources, including money, from governments, universities, and corporations. The number of women-owned businesses in the United States increased 44% from 2001 to 2011, says the Center for Women's Business Research. Raising capital or investment money is a major problem for startups because they need money to grow. Only 2% of women-run startups in the U.S. receive support from venture capitalists, says a study by the National Foundation for Women Business Owners and Wells Fargo and Company. Yet, women in the U.S. own 38% of U.S. businesses, or 9.1 million companies, says the study. These companies produce $3 trillion yearly and create 16% of U.S. jobs. Springboard Enterprises in Washington, D.C. is among the organizations adding to the rise in women's entrepreneurship. The group helps connect investors with women-owned startups. It says it has helped about 600 women-owned companies raise $7 billion worldwide. Another factor fueling women's entrepreneurship is the rise of incubators for startup companies. Incubators are often located at universities. They provide possible mentors and investors. Babson College's Center for Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership in Wellesley, Massachusetts, is an example. It also holds a yearly business competition for women entrepreneurs with a grand prize of $250,000. For VOA Learning English, I'm Ann Ball.
From VOA Learning English, this is the Economics Report. Slowing economic growth around the world is endangering the World Bank's goal of ending extreme poverty by 2030. That is what World Bank President Jim Young Kim said recently. He said the goal remains within reach. But he thinks extreme poverty will disappear only if world leaders and financial and development agencies do their part. The United Nations says extreme poverty is a condition in which basic human needs are not being satisfied or met. These needs include having clean drinking water, food, and an education. Jim Young Kim says the world has made some progress toward reaching the goal. He says over 25 years, the number of people living in extreme poverty has been cut in half. However, nearly 1 billion people continue to live on less than about $1.25 a day. Slowing economic growth in industrial and developing economies is affecting the fight against extreme poverty. Mr. Kim says one solution is to partner with new financial institutions, such as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the New Development Bank. Banking coalitions could help identify financing for transportation and other infrastructure needs that the World Bank alone cannot provide. Many people are concerned that new lending agencies will reduce the influence of existing ones. But Mr. Kim says the issue is not influence. He says the enemy cannot be other institutions, but has to be poverty. The World Bank is expected to consider those issues when world leaders gather at the United Nations later this year. For VOA Learning English, I'm Alex Villarreal.